Experiencing my first year as a landlord almost made me quit real estate forever. I faced 5 big problems that no other investors were talking about, one of which cost me $9,000 overnight. Let me go ahead and share them with you so that you don't make the same mistakes I did that lost me over $30,000 on my very first real estate deal. My very first struggle came a few months after being a landlord. A tenant called me and said, "Dude, there's brown mucky liquid that's pouring out of the kitchen sink and it's all over the kitchen floor and it's also backing up in the showers into the bathrooms. It smells like sewage." Of course, I started panicking. In my head, I was like, what if I have to replace the whole flooring because it got soaked with sewage water? What if the whole house ends up getting flooded with sewage? Luckily, I found a plumber who was willing to go out there and figure out what was going on. I also had a sanitation crew go out to clean up the sewage. The plumber stuck his camera down the sewage pipe and found that there were tree roots digging into the pipes and the whole pipe was cut in half. To replace the entire line, I had to pay $9,000. And this was on my very first property. I learned that you have to do a sewage line inspection, which is not part of the normal home inspection, before you buy the property. And you want to do a sewage line inspection in any houses that are older than the 1980s, because those are the ones that are most likely going to have a broken sewage line. Now, the second struggle that I ran into was when I hired my first contractor to do some renovations on my house. I wanted to add an extra bedroom so that I can rent that bedroom out for extra rent. So when I called up the contractor, he said it would only take about 2 weeks to do this job. So I said, okay, and let him do his thing. At the end of those first 2 weeks, I checked out the house and I only saw framing was done. The contractor wasn't even close to finishing. Frustrated, I called him up and said, "Dude, what the heck is going on here?" Of course, the contractor apologized and said he got pulled out on another project. And unfortunately, I paid him the full amount up front, so it was very hard for me to incentivize him to finish the project when I already paid him for it. And after much pushing and prodding, I was finally able to get him to complete the project in 4 weeks. Unfortunately, that was a lot of lost time. I could have used that time to rent out the place much sooner. So I learned an important lesson, and that is you have to build the right team as a real estate investor. And at the very beginning, when you meet these people, you have to be very clear in your expectations. In this case, I should have set the expectation that I would only pay a third up front so that I check in on his progress and make sure he's completing the work. Otherwise, he doesn't get paid for the rest of the project. By setting proper expectations, people also take you a lot more seriously because you're telling them exactly what you want and you're leading them. Now, my third struggle came when I started filling up the house with tenants. I brought in this really problem tenant, and he was actually from the same fraternity that I was in back in college. I went to a fraternity retreat with him, and he was loud, he was a partier, and I knew he was that type of person. But I was desperate to bring in tenants and avoid vacancies. I thought, what was the worst that could happen? Apparently, the worst was pretty bad. Just about a month or so after he moved in, I got a call from a policeman that the kids were throwing a wild Halloween party. There's over 80 people at the house, and I am violating fire code as the owner of the house. So, of course, I panicked, and I had to call him up and tell him to knock it off and please tell everyone at the party that they have to go home. Now, how did I fall into this trap? Well, the thing that I learned from this is to never make a decision based off of fear. This was a very fear-based decision. I was worried that I wouldn't be able to fill my house with tenants and I would end up with vacancies and have to pay the mortgage out of pocket. So I took on a tenant who I knew was most likely going to be a problem tenant. It would have been much safer if I had just been a little bit more patient and waited to bring in a good, high-quality tenant, instead of filling the space with tenants who are less qualified and showed a lot of red flags. So when you do your search for finding tenants, make sure you look for any red flags before you end up signing a lease with them. Are they somebody who seems to be very needy? Do they act immature or unprofessional? Those are all signs that this could be a problem tenant later on. Now, my fourth struggle was when COVID-19 hit and all of the college classes went online. I panicked. I was like, how am I going to have tenants in my house if everyone's at home studying online? The fact was, I already had tenants on signed leases, but because of the national emergency, I couldn't enforce those leases. And I was like worried that I'm going to have to pay $7,000 per month in mortgage payments out of pocket if I don't have anyone at my properties. Luckily, I snapped myself out of it and I asked myself, what could I do? What actions can I take? And I treated it like a learning experience. And what I actually ended up doing was I called up every single tenant on a lease personally and I asked them if they wanted to stay. About 50% of them actually said they wanted to stay there. And the other 50%, I called them up and I asked them, okay, since you said that you don't want to stay, are you willing to stay if I give you $100 off per month? About half of that 50% of people that said they didn't want to stay agreed to actually stay with the $100 discount. So that was 25% of the overall amount. So at this point, I had about 75% of my place filled. So for the last 25%, I stepped up my marketing game. I contacted every single lead that came in and I personally said, hey, look, I understand that COVID's going on, but we'll do whatever we can to make this place comfortable for you. Plus, you'll be able to hang out with some of your friends at the property rather than having to study all alone. Plus, a lot of the students wanted to avoid staying at their parents' place because they felt it was too chaotic of an environment to study in. So luckily, after all of that pushing, I was able to get all of my places filled. I did take a pretty big pay cut because I offered all of those discounts. So I was making about $9,300 per month instead of my original $10,755 per month. But that was still more than enough cash flow to keep me afloat during COVID. The point is, I got creative when something wasn't working. Instead of assuming that I had no power to change anything, I came instead from a place of, I'm going to make this happen no matter what, and every problem has a solution. Now, my final struggle was when I lost over $30,000 on my very first house due to it being a very old house and I had to replace a lot of key items on it. But what I found is that over time, that house appreciated in value. In fact, within the first few years, the house appreciated about $100,000. And so I was able to take out that $100,000 using a home equity line of credit to purchase more properties. So even if I lost a lot of money initially, if you just hold on to that property, you will always make money in the long run. And you can usually take out that appreciation using a cash out refinance or a home equity line of credit. A lot of people assume that after that first property, they're going to be out of money because you have to put a 20% down payment. Well, that's actually not true because you can leverage the equity on your existing properties to purchase those future properties. And eventually, I sold my very first house, which I had bought for $262,000. I sold it for $437,500, which was about a $170,000 gain. That's pretty amazing, right? That's the power of real estate investing. In the long run, even if you mess up big time, if you are patient with real estate investing and you use the right strategy, you'll get back all the money that you lost and much more. So I hope you guys learned a lot from my mistakes. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share it with your friends or others who are really struggling with getting started in real estate investing. Thanks again for watching, and I will see you on next week's video.